All right. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ava Michael. I'm an AmeriCorps wildlife educator with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. And with me is Julie Gabrielson. She is a conservation educator with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Julie will be helping me with everyone's questions and making sure everything goes smoothly today. So before we get started, let's go over a few ground rules. All right. So everything is going to be rated PG today. So inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated in the chat or Q&A box. Everything needs to be on topic, and anything else will result in being muted or being cut out of the chat box or the Q&A box. All right, so today's presentation is going to be talking about the Rocky Mountain goats. So today we are going to be going over the range and habitat, the history of management, the Rocky Mountains characteristics, taxonomy, the sexual dimorphism or the difference between the males and the females, their breeding season. We're going to go over their kids, which are their offspring, their adaptations, their causes of mortality, conservation and management, as well as tracking and monitoring efforts that are going on. All right, so first off, let's go over the classifications of the mountain goats. So first off, we have the Nanny. You can see a picture of her right here. She looks very similar to the billy goat. The billy goat is the male adult. This is a much younger male adult. So typically the billy goats tend to look very similar to the Nanny. And then we have the kids. Now these are the offsprings that are less than 1 year old. And then we also have yearlings. Now yearlings are those that are between 1 and 2 years old. All right, so let's go over the range. So they are endemic to North America, meaning they are native to North America, and you can find them in Western Canada as well as Northwestern United States. So they are found in Nevada. You can find them in the Ruby Mountains, as well as the East Humboldt River area. All right, so their habitat, they are found in subalpine to alpine habitat, meaning montane habitat. So they're usually found in high altitude environments, sometimes above 13,000 feet. In the summer, they tend to stay around 3,000 or 9,500 feet and above, and they can be found above the tree lines. Now in the winter, they usually stay at lower elevations, especially with the nannies. This is because their kids are more mature and they aren't as worried about protecting them from predators. But they do migrate to lower elevations in the winter time. So they can be found in steep and rocky cliffs, projecting pinnacles, ledges, talus slides, and many different areas. All right, so for the kids, the nannies with kids tend to stay in lush alpine meadow complexes, and after birth, they are on their feet within about 10 minutes. So they need to be moving very quickly once they are born, and they are climbing these very steep slopes very quickly after birth. So you can find the mountain goats in wallowing areas in the summertime. And these wallowing areas are simply depressions that are created by the mountain goats rolling in the soil. You can see in this picture, one of the nannies, she is rolling in the soil, and this is to remove these external parasites as well as to help cool them down. All right, so the history of their management. So they were introduced into the Ruby Mountains in the mid-1960s, and 12 of these mountain goats were released, and these goats were obtained from Washington State. In 1981, 11 goats also obtained from Washington were released into the East Humboldt Mountain Range, and as of 2003, there are approximately 100 animals in the East Humboldts and 250 animals in the Ruby Mountains. They are hunted in limited numbers as a big game animal currently, But throughout the 1900s, mountain goats were introduced into some areas outside of their known historical range in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. So they were reintroduced into many of the parts where they were native at one point. However, but in some of those parts, they were killed off or they were relocated into different areas. So they have been working on reintroducing these mountain goats into areas where they are native but are no longer residing. All right, so the Rocky Mountain goat is an animal. They do give birth to live offspring, but they are not a true goat. Even though they look very similar to a goat, they are called a goat, they are not actually a goat, but they are a close relative. But however, they are part of the antelope family, so they are more properly known as goat antelopes. So their lifespan ranges from 9 to 12 years and up to 18 years in the wild. So they do live longer in the wild. Males tend to live about 15 years, females about 18 to 20 years. So let's go over their taxonomy. I think this is a great way of kind of understanding the specifics of the mountain goat. So their scientific name is Orianus americanus. This means a mountain lamb belonging to America. Their classification is a hoofed ruminant mammal. Now by ruminant, I mean that instead of one compartment for their stomach, they have 4 compartments. This is their way of getting nutrients from plant-based foods by fermenting it in the specialized stomach prior to digestion. So they are also even-toed hoofed mammals, and they are from the family Bovidae. So Bovidae is just any hoofed mammal. So this includes cows, sheep, goats, and other similar mammals. All right, so let's go over their characteristics. So it's very hard to mix them up with any other animal. They have that very distinct white beard and thick white coat. This is great for camouflaging in snowy areas as well as rocky areas. And they're black or kind of grayish horns, cloven hooves, and they even have a black tongue. Now, they weigh approximately 100 to 300 pounds. But the heaviest recorded mountain goat was 500 pounds. So they can get very large. Their size ranges from 2.5 to 3 feet tall at the shoulders and 4.5 to 5 feet in length. Now they do get these seasonal coats. I know in this picture, the mountain goat kind of looks a little bit mangy, but this is just while it's molting and shedding off that older coat. So in the summertime, they will begin the shedding process around June. Fillies tend to shed their coats first, and they will begin shedding in June, and the molt usually is complete by mid-July. Now, the nannies with kids tend to shed their coats later than the nannies without kids. And the yearlings, those that are between 1 year old and 2 years old, they are the last to molt. So this usually occurs in mid-August. Now in wintertime, the coat is completely grown in by around November to early December. And they will shed this thick fur coat in the warmer months by rubbing up against trees and different plants. So if you are following along the trail of a mountain goat, sometimes you can find these little clumps of fur. Sometimes you can even find whole wads of this fur. It's usually pretty gross by the time it ends up rubbed up against these trees and these bushes. It collects a lot of debris and leaves, but a lot of people still use it for sewing and such, and will collect this fur. It's very good quality. However, in the winter time, it usually gets this yellowish hue just because it's a little bit older by then and it's collected a lot of dirt and debris. All right, so their diet, they almost eat all plants that they can find in these high mountainous areas or these alpine habitats. but they tend to stick around, or they tend to eat plants, grasses, mosses, and other alpine vegetation. They are herbivores, and their diet really depends on the season as well as the availability of certain foods. So in the summertime, usually they can find sedges and grasses, and in the wintertime, they can usually find coniferous trees, meaning those with cones and pine needles and leaves. But they will, in the spring and summertime, they will look for these salt licks, which I will go into more detail on. All right, so salt licks are places on the ground where salt appears naturally or has been deposited by humans. Now, birds and animals tend to congregate around these areas. It's very important mineral. It has very important minerals in it as well as nutrients. Now, mountain goats love their salt, so they will look for these areas in the spring and summer, and it is an essential nutrient for them. So it's very important. Some relocation projects have actually moved mountain goats into areas where there are no salt licks and no salt deposits. And this means that those mountain goats go to these recreational areas where humans are and try and find their salt that way. So they will follow the humans because humans produce a lot of salt through their sweat and urine. And you can see in this picture, they are actually licking this backpacker's bag because that person has probably produced a lot of sweat and that has stuck to their backpack. So the mountain goats have taken over this person's backpack. Person probably is not going to get that backpack anytime soon. But they are attracted to people because of this. And oftentimes they will come up to people who are sweating and are producing the salt if they are not able to find their own salt licks. All right, so what do you do if you do come across a mountain goat? So you want to observe them from a distance. You don't want to approach them. You want to avoid causing them any stress because you do not know what their reaction might be. They have killed a couple people recently, and that is because they have moved. Well, it is believed that is because they have moved into these areas that do not have these salt licks. So they are moving into these recreational areas where there are more people and there are more chances of them being spooked. So it's very important that you do not feed the mountain goats because you do not want them associating you with food and coming up to you because they may charge if they feel like they are being chased or crowded or followed. So do not make any sudden loud noises. If you are in these alpine areas where you can see them on the cliff sides, you especially do not want to make these loud noises because they could accidentally fall if they are scared, or they could get hit by a rock that they accidentally move too quickly. Okay, so mountain goats are able to live in these alpine areas because they have all of these incredible adaptations. So they of course have these white long coats. This is great for staying warm because they are in these alpine habitats. They experience a lot of wind, a lot of snow, and a lot of uncertain weather conditions, and they need to be able to stay warm. And male mountain goats or billy goats actually have thicker coats, so they are able to move into these snowy areas better than the nannies are able to. But they do have incredible eyesight. They actually are able to see something moving up to a mile away, which is very impressive. So this is great if they are trying to avoid predators or keep an eye out for predators. This is part of why they will stay in these herds, is to look out for predators and then move away if they do see them. So they are very strong and agile. They will jump nearly 12 feet in a single bound, and this really helps them to climb these mountainous areas and these rocky ledges. So they have these incredible climbing abilities, of course, with their cloven hooves, as you can see in the picture. Whenever they are running, sometimes you can find their prints in the soil, and they will have spread out toes. And this usually means they are moving very quickly. If the toes are closer together, that means that they're very relaxed and they're walking slowly or standing for a long period of time. But they do have these rough pads that are able to hold on to these ledges very easily. So they are able to climb almost 1,500 vertical feet in just 20 minutes, which is incredible. And they can scale slopes at angles of about 60 degrees. So they're very well adapted to climbing these alpine environments. And their hooves are small or are soft and cloven, and they even act like suction cups. So this is how they're able to grasp on to these very small ledges. All right, so if you are going to be hunting mountain goats, you want to be sure that you are harvesting the males unless you are given different instructions by a wildlife official. So you want to make sure that you are correctly identifying the different genders. And there are really only about 4 ways of doing this, which I will go into more detail. But we have you want to look out for the horns, the physical characteristics, and the behavior. And you want to use more than one identifier, because if you're just looking at one identifier, you might misidentify and then accidentally kill a nanny, which nannies are very important for making sure that the next generation of mountain goats is successful and healthy. All right, so if you are stalking the mountain goat, you want to make sure you're close enough to be able to accurately see and identify these animals. And you want to be sure that whenever you shoot the mountain goat, that you are making sure that they will fall into an area that is reachable for you. You don't want them going into a crevice that you are not able to reach. That would be a shame and kind of a waste. So you want to make sure that you are accurately predicting where they will fall. All right, so again, we have the nanny, which is the female mountain goat. We have the billy, which is the male mountain goat. And we have the kid, which is less than a year old. And we also have the yearlings, which are between an adult and a kid. They're kind of like a teenager, but they are 1 to 2 years old. All right, so this is a quick overview of the difference between a nanny and a billy. So a nanny, her horns are going to be much thinner than the billy goats, and they're going to have this sharp curve near the tip. For the billy goats, they're going to have a thicker horn with a gradual curvature. And the nanny is going to tend to be smaller than the billy. The billy is going to be larger and stockier than the nanny. And for behavior, the nanny is mostly going to be in large groups. Unless she is giving birth, she's going to stay in these large groups for protection. And the billy tends to be more solitary and will sometimes form groups of 2 to 3 other billies. All right, and another great way of telling the difference between a nanny and a billy is looking at their urination posture. So the nanny will tend to squat and have her rump near the ground. The billy will, of course, stand stretching. So if you want to wait around and make sure that you are correctly identifying them, this is a sure way of telling the difference between the 2 genders. All right, so for the horns, this is a quick overview of the horns. So they first become visible on the kids around July. Most yearling goats have horns about 6 inches in length, and they will look more like the adult. They look a lot like the adult horns. The yearlings will tend to grow over half of their expected horn length. So they have very long horns by the time they are around 2. So at 2 years old and older, they will have horn lengths longer than their total ear length. But their horns tend to be black or grayish in color, and they will be around 8 to 10 inches in length. And they are made out of a carotenoid material. Now, a carotenoid material is the same material as your fingernails. So it's a very sturdy and strong material, and they will produce these growth rings. Now, these are annual growth rings, and their horns will get longer and thicker with age. So this is a good way of figuring out how old a mountain goat is. Of course, you have to be very close in order to see this. All right, so for the nanny horns, they are thinner, as you can see in the pictures. They have this sharp curve partway through their horns, and they have a wider distance between the bases. And they do have smaller bases than the billies do, The horn length of the males and females is very similar, but the male horns tend to be about 10 to 20% thicker at the base than the females. So the females have horn bases equal to or less than her eye width. So this is a great way of telling the difference between a nanny and a male is by looking at the horns and looking for all of these differences. So now the billy goat. So the billy goat will have horns that are thicker throughout the length. It's more of a gradual curvature than the nannies have, and their bases are closer together. So they have larger bases and they have large glands behind their bases. So you can see this very well in the corner picture. There's this discoloration surrounding the base of the billy goat's horns. And this dark coloring is a great way of kind of telling the difference between the male and the female. All right, so here's a side-by-side of the nanny and the billy. So you can see that the nanny has the thinner horns, the thinner base, and the billy has the thicker horn and the thicker base and has more of a gradual curvature. All right, so for size, the nanny is of course smaller, the billy is stockier and larger, and their size will depend on the season. They change throughout the year. So an adult body mass of a midsummer, or the adult body mass of a nanny in midsummer ranges from 132 to 185 pounds. And for billy goats, it ranges from 209 to 342 pounds. So for nanny behavior, this is also a great way of telling the difference. This is probably one of the better ways of telling the difference between the genders. So they do live in matriarchal herds. This means female dominated herds, except for during breeding season, which I will discuss more in a little bit. But they will fight other nannies whenever they are in these herds, and this is typically to protect their territory and food, especially whenever they have a kid. They want to make sure that they have as much of food available as possible. So they will form these herds with kids, and they will form large groups, sometimes up to 20 mountain goats, depending on the overall population within an area. But they will spend much of the year in the herds with the kids, and they will form larger groups in the winter to protect these areas. And in the summer, they will disperse into smaller herds, and they will climb to higher elevations and congregate more at salt licks. Okay, so for the billy behavior, they're more solitary. They do not typically form their own herds, but when they do, they will form herds of about 2 to 3 other billy goats. So during mating season, they will battle rivals for prospective females, and they do not fight like the bighorn sheep. They will not butt heads, but they will use their horns during this display. All right, so during breeding season, they are polygamous. One male will typically follow one nanny around for 2 to 3 days and then move on to another female and then eventually to another herd. So one billy goat can produce a few kids during that season. Typically, mating season only occurs about 2 weeks. But they will start breeding around 2.5 years. It all depends on the type of population that they have. So an established population, meaning a population that has been in that area for a long period of time and it's been more stable, they do not often give birth until they are around 4 or 5 years old. And in newly translocated populations or populations that have recently been moved in, females will start reproducing at 2 or 3 years old. So they typically have a later sexual maturity than some of the other animals within that area. So this usually happens around October to December. Males and females will gather to breed, and this is around the only time of the year that males and females will gather together, unless there is a male kid, of course. So during the summertime, the billies will leave the nannies and the kids, and they will form separate bachelor herds. All right, so now that we've had the breeding season, we have the kids. So the nannies will typically isolate themselves before giving birth, and they will typically give birth in these high altitude areas and sometimes even on the edge of a cliff. The kids are able to move very quickly, so they're not as concerned about the kids not being able to walk. And it is, fun fact, it is actually called kidding whenever a female goat gives birth. So the kids also will end up weighing around 35 pounds, but at birth, they will weigh around 7 to 8 pounds. And they usually give birth mid-May to mid-June, and the kids end up being about 20 inches at the front of the shoulder. So now yearlings are those between 1-year-old and 2-year-old. They will weigh 60 to 70 pounds. So they will almost double their weight, and they will stand about 27 inches, which is only about a 7-inch difference between the kids and the yearlings. They're considered fully grown at 6 years old. So they grow very quickly whenever they are kids, but very slowly whenever they are a little bit older. So they will nurse for a short period of time, and then they will quickly begin eating grasses and mosses and such. So they will go from being kids to yearlings. And during this time, the nannies will take full care of them. Sometimes you will see nannies that look malnourished and are very skinny. And this is because the kids are eating all the food that's available. So sometimes you'll see a very plump kid and a very skinny nanny. But the mountain goats do have hierarchies that are determined early whenever the kids are playing. So sometimes the kids that are playing, they're actually establishing their dominance at a very young age. All right, so causes of mortality. There are many causes of mortality, mostly predation, hunting, and accidental. So of course, predators can kill mountain goats, especially bears, mountain lions, wolves, and golden eagles. Now, nannies with kids, they are more prone to being killed by predators than, say, the billies are. And hunting, this is why hunting is regulated, because at one point, mountain goats were overhunted. So now we're monitoring and making sure that they are no longer overhunted. And of course, accidental deaths. Now, mountain goats can die from snow slides, as well as climbing related incidences. Even though they are very agile climbers, they can still die from being hit by a rock, from falling and such, especially the kids that are still learning how to climb. Sometimes they will fall. All right, and separation of the kids from the nannies. Now, this is a big one. If, say, a nanny accidentally dies or is killed by a predator, then the kids do not often live. Unless the kids are closer to a year old and are able to fend for themselves, they typically do not make it. However, some nannies have been known to take in kids, especially if they are part of an established herd. Some nannies will adopt these kids and take care of them as their own. So motor vehicles, of course, can kill mountain goats, as well as aggressive interspecific fighting. So different species might fight these mountain goats and kill them. So mountain lions are known to do this. This is why mountain goats have these sharp, tough horns. It's a great defense mechanism against these predators. All right, another issue that we see with the mountain goats is disease. So one of the main diseases that is an issue is contagious eczema. So this is a virus, and its symptoms include scabby growths, lesions, and this is a skin-based virus that is focused around the face and the muzzle. Now, it is not typically fatal, but it can spread to people, especially if people are touching these sores and such and lesions on their face, and then they touch their own scratches, cuts, eyes, nose, or mouth. So this is easily spread to people. This is why you do not want to touch these wild animals, because they might be starting to show these signs and you might not see this. So this virus can lay dormant in the soil for long periods of time and then enter into the host through skin abrasions. So these lesions are extremely painful. and they can result in the mountain goat dying. Now, they do not directly cause the death of the mountain goat, but they can impact the animal to where it does not feed. It might cause it to be emaciated and ultimately to die. So whenever you see this animal, you want to report it to a wildlife official. You do not want to directly interact with this animal. But it is important that it does not spread to the rest of the herd. All right, so there are many tracking and monitoring initiatives that are going on, especially in areas such as Washington and Utah, not as much in Nevada simply because it is not a population that is considered under threat. But these translocation projects simply mean that they are moving these populations back into areas where they might have been native into one point and then might have been hunted until the point where there was no longer a population, or they might have moved out of that area if it was being developed. So these translocation projects and relocation projects are very important for reestablishing these herds into these areas. And they do this by tranquilizing the animals from large herds that do not necessarily need as many mountain goats. And they will do this from a helicopter, potentially on foot, depending on the resources that are available for that project. And then they will have a veterinarian come in and give a full body examination. So they will take blood, they will look at their teeth, they will weigh them and such. And then they will put them into trucks and relocate them, maybe even in helicopters. There are a lot of videos on YouTube that you can look at of this process, but they will move them into these new areas and try and reestablish them. And as you can see in these pictures, they will often put these leather collars on to track them throughout their life. This is a great way of seeing if the nannies will die. They typically only put them on the nannies just so that way they can tell how well the population is doing, if the nannies are dying off, if the nannies are reproducing and such. So they will typically only put these collars on the nannies, but they are made out of a leather. And the kids sometimes will even get their own collars, which will break off once they reach about a year old. So they will do follow-up monitoring initiatives as well. They will have researchers go into the field and track these mountain goats specifically, because each mountain goat has their own way of monitoring. So they will go out into the field and track these mountain goats, see if they've reproduced, see how well the population is doing. And if they come back with positive numbers of new kids, then this is very good. It means that they have successfully reestablish this population into this area. So this is a very important initiative that is happening. And if you see these mountain goats in the wildlife with these collars, you want to be sure that you are leaving these alone. And if you do kill them, you want to make sure that you are reporting this back. All right. So I'm going to leave this open for questions now. I know we went over a lot of material. So if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and I will be answering these.
Ava, we do have a question in Q&A asking, why are they introduced to areas that is not a part of their native range? Could it be from habitat that fits them?
Typically, they are, currently they are typically being reintroduced into areas where they were once native and might have been killed off due to hunting and such. But they were at one point, especially in the early 1900s, they were introduced into areas where they were not native. And this was bad because some of these areas did not have these natural salt licks. So they were not able to get these essential nutrients that they have. So an example that I know of is in Washington, North Cascades. They had a very good, healthy population of mountain goats where they were native to that area. And then due to hunting, they wanted to move them to the Olympics. And once they moved them to the Olympics, the population took over this habitat because they did not have those natural predators, and they were able to monopolize that environment. So what they are doing now is they are trying to move that population back into the North Cascades reestablish a healthy population, and then remove the population that is in the Olympics.
Okay, another question in the chat was, how often do they die from falling?
I think it depends on the area, but they do die off they die very often from falling. You wouldn't think it based on that being their main habitat, but they often do die from falling, especially the kids that are still learning how to climb these very steep slopes. Okay, and I see, when is the birth season? I think I had said mid-June and July, but they usually only give birth, or they usually give birth within about a 2-week time span because their mating season is so short. So they often give birth around the same time, and I think it was only about 44% of nannies will give birth. And this is around 8 to 12 years old that they predominantly give birth.
Okay, another question that just came in is, do kids feed on nanny milk or regurgitation?
So they do both. So kids, they have a very short time span where they will feed off of their mother and they will drink milk, and then they will quickly move on to being able to digest those natural grasses and kind of create a cud and start chewing and start being ruminant, basically.
Okay, another question is, how do they sound?
All right, they have it's kind of like a screeching sound. I don't know how else to describe it. It's very unique though. It's not a good sound. Okay, and I see, do nannies feed? Okay, never mind. I answered that one.
Yeah, if you look at the open ones, are there places in the Nevada range where the public can easily observe them?
Yes, I believe I said the Humboldt River and the Ruby Mountains. You can visit them. It's not always easy simply because they are at these very high elevations. I would recommend doing this during the winter time because they tend to stay at lower elevations. If you're going to look for them in the summertime, you need to be prepared to go out and be able to climb these steep cliffs like they do. But actually in Yellowstone Park, they are having issues with the mountain goats being so prevalent just because they are not a native species. So they are taking over this range and people are able to see them very easily. Just like in the Olympic Mountains, you can go out and find them along the trails because they are attracted to those areas, those recreational areas and those areas where people tend to congregate. But here, you have to climb basically the same habitats that they do.
On occasion, if you drive up Lamoille Canyon, you can find them from the road on occasions, not necessarily too close to the road. Definitely bring binoculars or spotting scopes. And then you can see them up on some of the faces up on there and in there. And it's usually like spring and summer that you can see them in there. But sometimes you don't have real extensive access driving into Lamoille Canyon either. Okay, another question is asking if their falling death rate is similar or more than bighorn sheep.
I am not exactly sure of that. I know they tend to fall a lot in Washington. I am not sure about Nevada. But do you have any information on this, Julie?
I do not. I am not familiar with the fall rate of either one of them to speak of that.
Because I know it's very hard to kind of track that just because their bodies end up getting very scattered very quickly. So usually they tend to find out this information from the collared goats and such, because then they can see if they stop moving for a day or so, then they tend to find that animal is dead. And then they can kind of go out into the field and see how that animal died. But if it's in a natural setting and they don't have collars, I think it's harder to calculate that number.
Another question is asking if they lick the highways for salt, the roads.
I don't think that they typically do. I'm not sure that there's much salt for them to lick. And they probably don't like the taste of gas. So, but
Go ahead.
yeah, but they tend to like recreational areas or areas that people congregate because of the salt availability or natural salt licks.
But with that, they'll stay at higher elevations too, as well, right?
Right, right. Yeah, they can find those salt deposits at higher elevations as well.
Okay, another question right now is asking if the hunts are generally guided for mountain goats.
They definitely can be, especially if you're a novice hunter. You can hire somebody to kind of help you find those mountain goats, but also you can go out on your own, I believe, and hunt those mountain goats as long as you have a permit to do so.
Okay, I think that's all for our questions currently. We can give it a few more minutes and see if any others come in. We do have, I just have to point this out. One of our participants today is from Roma, Italy, and joining us and watching from Italy. So thanks for joining us. That's cool to see that we're reaching out that far.
Yes, that's incredible. All right.
Okay, okay, another question. In the wild, we are told to make noise to scare away bears. If I understand correct, with Rocky Mountain goats, one does not want to make noise. How would one scare away Rocky Mountain goats?
Yes, there actually was an instance in the Olympic Mountains where a mountain goat came up to somebody because they were attracted to that salt. At least that's the hypothesis. And that person tried shooing the mountain goat away, and the mountain goat actually killed that person. So you do not want to make those sudden movements or frighten the mountain goat because you do not know how it's going to react because it might charge you or chase you. But simply moving away very quietly and very kind of relaxed might do the trick. But yeah, don't frighten the mountain goat because it might react negatively to that. But just move away very slowly and very quietly.
So do you think in that situation, it was more that they scared the goat and that's why it responded that way? Or was it just an aggressive return?
Um, it's believed, well, he did shoo the goat away and try and like scare it away. And they believe that that's what caused that case of him being killed by the mountain goat. But of course, they're not able to tell exactly what was the cause. But that mountain goat was coming up to him and he was trying to shoo it away from the group of people that was there.
Okay, and another question, is the meat good to eat?
I have not personally tried it. I have heard that it is good to eat. Julie might be a better expert on this.
I don't know about expert, but I have tried it. I have never harvested one myself. I've had several encounters with them when I'm out hiking or archery hunting for deer. But I have gotten the opportunity to try it on a couple occasions, and it's been really good. I can't say I can compare it to anything right off the top of my head. It's just kind of got its own little taste, but it's still a favorable taste. Okay, I think that is all of our questions for now. Do you want to give it another minute or two, or?
Yeah, maybe another minute,
Okay.
just in case anybody is still typing.
Oh, and sure enough, there was one. Are they hunted for the meat?
They are often hunted for meat as well as their fur. Their fur is very valuable. So it's pretty much the entire body. Some people will also collect the heads and maybe taxidermy the animal.
When is hunting season for them?
Ooh, I believe hunting season is during the summer. I'm not exactly sure though. Do you know, Julie?
I'm going to research that right now. I want to say it's in the fall.
Okay, so that would be during mating season whenever they're all congregating together. So that would make sense.
Yes, September 1st through October 31st are the resident hunts.
Okay. So slightly before mating season.
Are all mountain goat subspecies the same in the US?
I do not believe so. This is a specific type of mountain goats. I believe in Europe they have their own type of mountain goats, but there are different types of mountain goats. This is simply the Rocky Mountain goat.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we've got everybody answered so far.
All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining in to the Rocky Mountain Goat presentation. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. All right, goodbye everyone.